June 12, 1940. The narrow streets of Vichy, France, reeked of damp stone and the faint acrid tang of uncollected rubbish piling up under the summer sun. Elise Laurent clutched her worn leather satchel tighter as she hurried past the grey-uniformed German soldiers patrolling the boulevard, their jackboots clicking like metronomes against the cobblestones. At 28, with her dark hair pinned under a simple scarf and her wool skirt brushing her calves, she blended into the crowd of weary civilians shuffling toward the market square. But her heart hammered not from fear of the occupation, though that was ever present, but from the weight of the small notebook hidden in her satchel's false lining. The air hummed with the low murmur of voices, a mix of French laced with hesitant German commands. A vendor hawked wilted vegetables from a cart, his eyes darting nervously as an officer barked orders nearby. Elise kept her gaze lowered, her steps measured, but inside her mind raced. Just 2 days ago, the armistice had been signed, slicing France in two like a butcher's knife. The north and west under direct Nazi control, the south a puppet state under Pétain's Vichy regime. And she was no longer just a radio operator for the French Weather Service. Last night, in a cramped attic room above a bakery, a shadowy figure from the nascent resistance had pressed a wireless transmitter into her hands, whispering her new orders. Send weather reports. Only weather. But weave in the signs of their movements. The Allies will listen. She slipped into the telegraph office, a squat building squeezed between a pharmacy and a shuttered cafe. The door creaked open, releasing a puff of stale tobacco smoke and the sharp scent of ink from the typing machines. Inside, the room buzzed with subdued activity, clerks in starched collars tapping at keys, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Madame Duval, the stern supervisor with her steel-grey bun and wire-rimmed glasses, glanced up from her desk. "Laurent, you're late. The afternoon dispatches wait for no one." Elise forced a smile, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Apologies, madame." The patrols slowed the trams again. She moved to her station, a scarred wooden desk cluttered with Morse code pads, a telegraph key, and a stack of yellowed weather charts. Her fingers trembled slightly as she plugged in the transmitter, the cool metal grounding her. This was her cover, her lifeline. Officially, she monitored atmospheric pressure and wind patterns for the National Service, relaying banal updates to coastal stations. But now, every tap of the key carried double meaning. As the afternoon wore on, the office filled with the rhythmic clatter of keys and the occasional cough from a chain-smoking clerk. Elise scanned the latest reports, barometric readings from Bordeaux, cloud cover over the Atlantic approaches. She encoded the first message carefully, her pencil scratching softly on paper. Front approaching from northwest, pressure falling to 10-12 millibars. Scattered showers expected by evening. Harmless words, or so they seemed. But to those who knew the cipher, Allied intelligence in London, piecing together fragments from agents like her, the front hinted at a convoy of German troop transports, spotted rumbling toward the port at dawn, their tires churning mud on the road from Paris. She hesitated, her pulse quickening before adding the twist, winds shifting easterly, gusts up to 15 knots. Easterly winds meant the Germans were funneling supplies from the Rhine, not just routine patrols. Elise's eyes flicked to the window, where beyond the lace curtains, a Wehrmacht truck rumbled past, its canvas sides bulging with crates stamped with black eagles. She'd seen them unload at the docks yesterday, ammunition perhaps or fuel drums, under the watchful eyes of Gestapo officers in long black coats. The telegraph key clicked under her fingers, sending the dots and dashes into the ether. Each pulse felt like a heartbeat, vulnerable to interception. If the Abwehr cracked her code, she pushed the thought away, focusing on the next report. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly over the massive central, mirroring the storm brewing in her chest. By dusk, as the office emptied, and the streets outside fell into an uneasy twilight hush, Elise gathered her things. Madame Duval nodded curtly. Good work today. Keep it precise. The Germans demand accuracy in all transmissions. Elise murmured agreement, stepping into the cooling evening air. The sky had bruised to a deep indigo, stars pricking through like distant signals. She walked homeward, past ration queues, snaking around the corner bakery, where the scent of fresh baguettes mingled with the sharper odor of fear sweat from the lined-up families. Her own apartment was a third-floor walk-up in a crumbling tenement, its walls papered in faded florals and furnished with a single bed, a hot plate, and the hidden wireless tucked behind a loose floorboard. Locking the door, she lit a single candle. Power was rationed, and shadows were her allies. Kneeling, she pried up the board, retrieving the bulky Set 48 transmitter, its dials glowing faintly in the dim light. This was the real work, beyond the office facade. Tuning to the frequency her contact had specified, she began keying in the full report, her message a tapestry of weather and war. Low-pressure system intensifying over channel, visibility poor, high fronts massing near Calais. But the words disguised troop build-ups along the coast, the glint of U-boat periscopes her lookout had glimpsed at dawn. But she lingered on the maps spread before her, hand-drawn on onion-skin paper, marking invasion routes the Germans whispered about in cafes, potential Allied landing points if D-Day ever came. As the transmitter hummed, static crackling like distant artillery, Elise imagined the receiver in some foggy English basement, a codebreaker hunched over it, translating her veiled warnings into maps of steel and fire. She wasn't just sending forecasts. She was charting the invasion's prelude, turning rain clouds into arrows, pointing to Normandy's shores. A sudden knock echoed through the building. Neighbors, or worse? She froze, key silent, breath held. The night deepened, and with it her resolve hardened. This was her war now, one coded gust at a time. The candle flickered as she resumed, the Morse code pulsing into the void. Far across the channel, in the war rooms of Whitehall, unseen hands would decode her words, sketching lines that could redraw Europe's fate. But here, in Vichy's stifling embrace, Elise Laurent was alone with the storm she helped unleash. September 1940. The humid haze of late summer clung to the hills outside Lyon, where Elise had been reassigned under the guise of expanding the weather network for Vichy's agricultural ministry. The train from Vichy had rattled through checkpoints, its cars packed with sullen passengers and the occasional SS officer scanning papers with cold efficiency. Now, in a modest villa on the outskirts, borrowed from a sympathetic farmer whose son had fled to join de Gaulle in England, Elise unpacked her few belongings. The air inside smelled of aged wood and lavender from the sachet in her drawer, a fragile normalcy amid the chaos. She'd left Vichy after that fateful knock proved to be nothing more than a neighbor complaining about the blackout curfew. But the close call lingered like a shadow. Her new handler, a wiry man named Jacques, with a limp from the Great War, had met her at the station in a battered Citroën, its engine coughing like an old smoker's lungs. "The Germans are sniffing around the telegraph offices," he'd muttered, eyes on the rearview mirror. "Too many eyes in the city. Here you'll broadcast from this safe house. Same cover, weather updates for the Luftwaffe's meteorologists. But layer it thicker, make it sing of their sins." The villa's attic served as her command post, a dusty space with slanted ceilings and a single dormer window overlooking vineyards, heavy with unpicked grapes. Elise set up the wireless on a rickety table, its legs reinforced with bricks to steady the vibrations from passing patrols. The Set 48 hummed to life that first night, its vacuum tubes warming with a soft glow that painted the walls in amber. Outside, crickets chirped in the warm dusk, punctuated by the distant rumble of troop trains shunting along the Rhone Valley tracks. She tuned the dial, the static whispering secrets before her fingers danced on the key. Moderate southerly winds, 10 knots, visibility 8 kilometers, cumulus building over the Jura. The message flowed out, innocuous to any eavesdropper, but to London it sketched the path of a panzer division rerouted south, their treads scarring the earth near Annecy. Elise had gleaned the intel from a barmaid at the local bistro, her ears attuned to the slurred boasts of off-duty officers nursing ersatz coffee. She'd lingered there that afternoon, nursing a glass of watery vin ordinaire, the room thick with pipe smoke and the tang of unwashed uniforms. A lieutenant, ruddy-faced and loosened by the drink, had grumbled about the iron beasts heading to the Alps to guard against those damned Italians stabbing us in the back. Her pencil flew across the notepad, translating whispers into code. But it wasn't enough. As weeks blurred into a rhythm of hidden broadcasts and daylight drudgery, filing reports at the regional weather station, a squat concrete bunker buzzing with typewriters and the acrid bite of mimeograph ink, Elise began to see patterns. The Germans weren't just moving troops. They were fortifying the coast, stringing barbed wire along beaches from Dieppe to Brest like a necklace of thorns. Her weather charts, official ones pinned to the station's walls, became her canvas. In the dim glow of her desk lamp, surrounded by the musty scent of stacked logs in the corner office, she'd trace invisible lines, wind vectors doubling as supply routes, isobars curving into troop concentrations. One crisp October morning, fog rolling in from the Saône like a German blanket, Elise arrived at the station early. The building was a hive of low voices and shuffling feet, clerks in ill-fitting suits consulting barometers that ticked like bomb fuses. Her superior, Monsieur Lefebvre, a balding man with a perpetual squint and a Vichy pin on his lapel, handed her a sheaf of intercepts. The Boche want precise forecasts for their Atlantic ops. No errors, Laurent. One slip, and we're all in the camps. She nodded, her throat tight, and retreated to her alcove partitioned by threadbare curtains. The radio receiver crackled faintly under the desk, disguised as a space heater. Tuning it low, she caught fragments from a resistance net, U-boats massing off Lorient, their wolf packs primed to choke the Allied convoys. Elise's mind whirred. Weather wasn't just cover, it was the key. Storms could scatter submarines, clear skies invite bombers. If she could map the invasion windows, the narrow gaps when seas calmed and winds favored landings, she could turn her reports into beacons. That evening, back in the attic, rain pattered against the roof like impatient fingers. Elise spread her maps across the floorboards creaking under her knees. Candlelight flickered over the paper, casting shadows that danced like spectral soldiers. She marked the coastal currents with red ink. High-pressure ridge stabilizing over Biscay, seas moderate. Beneath the code, she embedded coordinates, harbors where Kriegsmarine engineers hammered away at pens, fortifying against the rumored Allied return. Her fingers ached from the keying, but she pressed on, imagining you there in the dimness, breath sinking with the Morse rhythm, feeling the weight of each dot, each dash. A week later, tension coiled tighter. Jacques arrived unannounced, slipping through the back door at midnight, his coat dripping from a sudden squall. The kitchen smelled of boiled cabbage from the farmer's supper, now cold on the stove. "We've got a big one," he said, voice low, sliding a crumpled envelope across the table. Inside, sketches from a scout near Cherbourg, concrete casemates rising like tumors along the cliffs, gun emplacements staring out to sea. "The Führer's building an Atlantic wall. Your broadcasts need to pinpoint the weak spots, where the dunes shift, where tides expose the flats." Elise's pulse raced as she studied the drawings, the lines blurring in the lantern's haze. She wasn't just reporting weather. She was architecting the breach. That night, as thunder growled over the horizon, she keyed her masterpiece. Tropical air mass advancing, temperatures rising to 18 degrees, low tide at 400, exposing sands for 2 hours. To London, it screamed opportunity. An invasion map disguised as a forecast, tides as timings for commandos, sands as landing zones. The transmitter warmed her palms, the signal leaping the channel like a thrown gauntlet. But risk shadowed every pulse. As dawn broke, grey light filtering through the shutters, a black sedan idled on the road below. Gestapo, routine patrol. Elise doused the set, heart slamming against her ribs. She slipped downstairs, joining the farmer's wife in the kitchen, kneading dough with feigned calm, the yeasty scent masking her fear. The car lingered, then drove on, exhaust trailing like suspicion. In the days that followed, her messages grew bolder, weaving storm fronts into sabotage signals, winds as warnings for resistance cells to strike rail yards, fronts as fronts of advancing panzers. By November's chill, with leaves rotting underfoot and frost etching the windows, Elise had transformed. No longer a mere operator, she was the weather vane of war, her codes etching invasion paths into the Allied mind. In London's code rooms, far from her attic vigil, analysts pored over her transmissions, pencils sketching shorelines where history would pivot. But here, in the occupied heartland, Elise moved through markets heavy with the scent of coal smoke and desperation. Eyes sharp for tales, her satchel heavier with secrets. The knock that never came in Vichy echoed now in every creak, every shadow. Yet she persisted, one veiled gale at a time, charting the storm that would sweep the Nazis into the sea. December 1940. Snow dusted the vineyards like a shroud, turning the hills around Lyon into a brittle white landscape that crunched underfoot with every cautious step. Elise pulled her woolen coat tighter against the biting wind, whipping down from the Jura mountains, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and frozen earth. The safe-house villa stood silent under the leaden sky, its chimney puffing thin smoke from the farmer's hearth below. But up in the attic, the air was colder, laced with the metallic tang of the wireless set and the faint ozone hum of its tubes. She'd been at it for hours, her breath fogging the dormer window as she scanned the horizon for any unnatural movement. Patrols, perhaps, or the glint of binoculars from a ridge. Jacques had vanished 2 weeks prior, swallowed by the shadows of the resistance network after a botched drop near Grenoble. Whispers reached her through a courier, a teenage boy with hollow cheeks and a bicycle that rattled like loose teeth. "He's underground. Trust no one new." The isolation gnawed at her, but it sharpened her focus. Now her broadcasts weren't just echoes of overheard chatter. They were precision strikes, forged from scraps gathered in the grey markets and fog-shrouded stations. This morning she'd slipped into the Regional Weather Bureau in Lyon proper, the city's spires looming like jagged teeth against the overcast. The building, a neoclassical relic with marble floors echoing her heels, buzzed with the low drone of generators and the scratch of pens on logbooks. Clerks huddled over radiograms, their faces illuminated by the green glow of cathode ray screens displaying pressure fronts. Monsieur Lefebvre had been waiting, his Vichy lapel pin catching the light from a bare bulb overhead. "Laurent, the latest from Berlin. They want tidal data for the channel ports, down to the minute. The Kriegsmarines gearing up for winter patrols." His voice carried an undercurrent of unease, eyes flicking to the door where a German liaison officer lounged, his peaked cap tilted back, nursing a cigarette that filled the air with bitter tobacco. Elise nodded, accepting the folder stamped with the swastika, her fingers brushing the stiff paper. Inside, charts of Normandy's coast, Le Havre to Cherbourg, marked with emplacements, officially for forecasting U-boat sorties. But she saw the gaps, the unguarded coves where waves lapped at shingle beaches, vulnerable to landing craft under cover of mist. Back at the villa by midday, the snow had thickened, blanketing the road in deceptive softness. Elise climbed the ladder to the attic, her boots leaving wet prints on the rungs. The wireless waited like a sentinel, its dials dusted with frost from the unheated space. She lit the kerosene lamp, its flames sputtering to life and casting wavering shadows across the maps pinned to the rafters, her private atlas of invasion. Red lines snaked along the Cotentin Peninsula, blue arrows denoting tidal flows she'd memorized from smuggled nautical almanacs. You can almost feel the chill seeping through the floorboards, hear the wind moaning like a warning as she tunes the set, the static crackling like ice breaking under pressure. Her first message of the afternoon was routine on the surface. Arctic air mass advancing, temperatures dropping to 2 degrees Celsius, northerly gales 25 knots, reducing visibility to 2 kilometers. But layered beneath, in the cipher she'd refined with Jacques' last instructions, a substitution grid keyed to meteorological terms, it painted the picture of a supply convoy frozen in place near Saint-Malo, their trucks bogged in mud turned to slush, ripe for sabotage. She'd spotted the tracks herself 2 days ago, cycling through the outskirts under the pretense of delivering weather bulletins to outlying farms. The convoy stretched like a wounded serpent along the D road, engines idling with throaty rumbles, soldiers stamping feet against the cold, while officers barked in guttural tones. One had eyed her curiously as she pedaled past, her basket overflowing with forged charts, but she'd kept her head down, scarf muffling her breath. As the key clicked under her fingers, dot dash dot, a staccato rhythm syncing with her pulse, Elise's mind wandered to the broader canvas. The Atlantic Wall was no mere rumor now. It was metastasizing. From her station contacts, she'd pieced together fragments. Concrete poured into molds at Toulon, steel rails warped into obstacles at Dunkirk. But the weather was the great equalizer. Storms could delay construction, expose flaws in the fortifications. She paused, pencil hovering over a fresh sheet, sketching a tidal chart for Utah Beach, though she didn't know the code name yet, just the stretch of dunes near Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, where low tide revealed a kilometer of flat sand, ideal for tanks if the winds held. The transmission cut short with a burst of interference, a high-pitched whine that made her wince. German direction-finding vans. She killed the power, heart thudding, and crouched by the window, peering through the lace of frost patterns. Below, the farmer's wife shoveled the path, her breaths puffing white clouds, oblivious to the attic's secrets. Minutes stretched like wire, the silence broken only by the drip of melting snow from the eaves. Clear. Elise exhaled, resuming with a shorter burst. High tide peak at 2200, currents northeast at 3 knots. To London, it flagged a window at Carentan, marshes that could swallow an army but drain under the right moon phase, turning bogs into boulevards for assault. Dusk fell early, the sky bruising purple as she descended for a meager supper, black bread and ersatz tea that tasted of chicory and regret. The kitchen radio droned Vichy propaganda, Pétain's voice crackling about collaboration's virtues, but Elise tuned it out, her thoughts on the maps upstairs. That night, as flakes swirled against the panes like frantic signals, she worked by lamplight, integrating the day's intel. A contact in the post office, a one-eyed veteran named Henri, had passed a note hidden in a bundle of meteorological journals. Fortifications at Pointe du Hoc, 150 mm guns emplaced, but seaward battery incomplete, weak revetments. She'd met him in a back-alley cafe, the air thick with the steam of onion soup and the murmur of black market deals. Henri's hands shook as he slid the envelope, whispering, "The Boche rush it. Weather's their enemy too." Elise wove it in masterfully. Storm front building over Bay of Seine, waves to 4 meters, unstable ground conditions forecast. Unstable ground. The soft cliffs eroding under winter gales, perfect for commandos to scale if timed with a squall. Her codes were evolving, no longer simple overlays but dynamic maps, pressure systems as defensive perimeters, fronts as assault vectors. Imagine yourself there, fingers numb on the key, the lamps glow your only warmth, each message a thread pulling the Allies closer to the shore. By midnight, exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but a final intercept from the bureau receiver, hidden in a bread box, spurred her on. RAF bombers had struck Hamburg. Retaliation loomed. German fighters would scramble from Caen airfields, but fog banks rolling in from the west could blind them. Fog advisory for coastal strips, density increasing after 0300. It was a lifeline for any covert flights, a veiled invitation to probe the wall's joints. As the set cooled, its hum fading to silence, Elise folded the maps, tucking them into a hollowed Bible on the shelf. The house settled with creaks like old bones, the wind howling a dirge outside. She blew out the lamp, lying on her cot in the dark, the cold sheets clinging like doubt. Risks mounted, rumors of a Gestapo sweep through Lyon. Informants turning for extra rations, yet in the quiet she envisioned the invasion. Higgins' boats slicing through her charted waves, troops storming sands she'd illuminated with coded sunlight. Her weather reports weren't whispers anymore, they were the wind at the Allies' backs, carving paths through the Nazi fortress. Sleep came fitfully, dreams laced with Morse code and the roar of surf on distant beaches. Tomorrow, the broadcasts would continue, each one a step closer to the breakers. January 1941. The frost-laced dawn crept over the Rhone Valley like a thief, painting the snow-blanketed vineyards in pale blues and greys that chilled the soul. Elise Laurent trudged through the crunching drifts toward the Lyon weather station, her galoshes sinking into the softened earth with each step, the air biting at her cheeks and carrying the crisp scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. At 29 now, her face had sharpened, lines etched by sleepless nights and the constant gnaw of vigilance. But her dark eyes burned with a fiercer resolve. The satchel slung over her shoulder bumped against her hip, heavy with not just charts, but the latest whispers from the underground. A baker's son who'd seen slave laborers hauling rebar to the beaches near Vierville, their chains rattling like grim percussion under the whip. The station loomed ahead, its concrete facade scarred by winter winds, steam puffing from vents like labored breaths. Inside, the lobby hummed with the low thrum of electric heaters fighting the cold, the air thick with the musty odor of damp wool and boiled coffee from a communal pot. Clerks stamped feet to warm them, their exhalations mingling in clouds as they sorted incoming dispatches. Monsieur Lefebvre intercepted her at the door, his overcoat dusted with flakes, moustache twitching like a nervous fuse. "Laurent, urgent from the coastal observatories. The Germans are demanding swell forecasts for the entire Norman coast, every cove, every tide pool. Say it's for mine-laying operations." His voice dropped, eyes darting to the German officer posted by the map room, a gaunt captain named Müller, with a scar slicing his cheek and a Luger holstered at his belt, idly flipping through a logbook. Elise's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression neutral, nodding as she took the dossier. "Understood. I'll cross-reference with the latest barometric trends." She moved to her alcove, the partition curtains whispering shut behind her like conspirators. The desk lamp cast a yellow pool over her workspace, illuminating stacks of graph paper and a brass aneroid barometer that ticked softly, its needle hovering at 1020 millibars, stable but deceptive. Beneath the desk, the disguised receiver hummed faintly, tuned to a resistance frequency, where fragments of intel crackled through. Rommel's Africa Corps pulling engineers from France, wall construction slowing at Sword Sector. She jotted it down, her pencil lead scraping like teeth on bone. By midday, the station filled with the clatter of teletype machines, spitting out data from Brest to Boulogne. The room's warmth turning the air soupy with sweat and ink. Elise pored over the official charts, tracing isobars that curled like serpents along the channel. But in her mind, they morphed, pressure ridges outlining battery positions at Longues-sur-Mer, where 150mm cannons were being mounted on rails, their barrels aimed like accusatory fingers at the sea. She'd gleaned details from a fisherman contact in Honfleur, met under the guise of buying salted cod at the market, his stall reeking of brine and fish scales, voice low amid the haggling crowd. "They're burying the guns in concrete bunkers, mademoiselle. But the tides there run fierce. One storm and the footings wash out." Her fingers itched for the wireless, but daylight broadcasts were suicide. Instead, She wove subtle hints into the station's outgoing reports, approved by Lefebvre before Muller's eagle eyes scanned them. Swell building from southwest, periods of 8 seconds, heights to 2 meters along Calvados coast. To the untrained, it predicted wave action for naval maneuvers. To London, it pinpointed erosion risks at Gold Beach, where the bluffs could crumble under assault if timed with a swell, exposing German rear lines like a peeled onion. You feel the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath catches as Müller pauses by her desk, his shadow falling cold across the paper, cigarette smoke curling like a question mark. Afternoon brought a courier from the safe house, a girl no older than 16, disguised as a flower seller with a basket of wilted hothouse blooms that perfumed the lobby with artificial sweetness. She brushed past Elise in the corridor, slipping a folded note into her pocket. New safe house compromised. Gestapo raid last night. Move at dusk. Supplies en route. Elise's pulse surged, hot and metallic in her throat. The farmer's wife had been arrested at dawn, dragged away in a squeal of tires and shouts, her cries echoing through the snow. No time for grief. Survival demanded motion. As the sun dipped, gilding the frost in fleeting gold, Elise slipped out a side door, the cold slapping her face like a warning. She circled the city on foot, weaving through alleyways slick with ice, the distant wail of factory sirens underscoring the curfew's approach. The new safe house was a cramped garret above a printer's shop in Vieux-Lyon, the air inside redolent of fresh ink and machine oil, stairs creaking under her weight like protesting joints. The proprietor, an elderly typesetter named Duval with ink-stained fingers and a conspiratorial wink, had prepared the space. A narrow table by a gabled window overlooking the Saône River, its waters dark and churning below. She unpacked swiftly, the Set 48 emerging from her satchel like a trusted blade, its leather case scarred from hasty relocations. The tubes warmed with a familiar buzz, casting flickering light across walls papered in faded newsprint, headlines of victories in the east that rang hollow. Tuning in, static hissed like surf, then cleared to a voice. Her new handler, codenamed Tempête, a former meteorologist from Marseille with a gravelly timbre. "Laurent, confirm receipt. We've lost 2 cells this month. Titan codes. Use tidal harmonics for coordinates now. The wall's backbone is the Pas-de-Calais. They're convinced that's the landing zone. Feed the deception." Elise's response clicked out in bursts. Acknowledged. Frontal system confirmed. But her real work began as night deepened, the river's murmur blending with the transmitter's hum. She spread the day's dossiers on the floor, knees aching against the rough planks, candle wax dripping like blood onto saucers. Red ink traced the deceptions, false fortifications bloated around Calais in her mental maps, drawing German reserves north while the true thrust built in Normandy. Neap tides persisting, minimal rise at 0500, sediments shifting in shallow approaches. It disguised a weak point at Omaha, cliffs riddled with unfinished casemates where commandos could scale under lunar cover, the sands firming just enough for rangers to gain footing. Hours blurred, her back stiffening as she keyed deeper layers. A midnight interrupt, engines growling low over the city, Luftwaffe night fighters prowling for illicit signals. She doused the light, huddling in darkness, the room plunging into inky chill, only the faint glow of city curfew lamps filtering through cracks. The planes droned past, engines fading like retreating thunder, leaving her heart echoing in the silence. Resuming, she embedded fresh intel from Duval's print runs, smuggled blueprints of hedgehog obstacles, steel tetrahedrons bristling along the high water mark at Juneau, obstructions forecast in low-lying areas, potential for displacement under gale force. Tempêt's follow-up arrived via a dead drop at dawn, a loaf of bread hollowed to hold microfilm, retrieved from a park bench where pigeons cooed amid the frost. Developing it in a makeshift darkroom in the shop's basement, the acrid bite of chemicals stinging her eyes, Elise uncovered sketches of Mulberry Harbours, Allied plans leaked through SOE channels. Her role crystallized, not just mapping defenses, but sinking weather windows to the artificial port's deployment, swells that could sink caissons if mistimed. By evening, as snow flurries danced outside like errant code, she broadcast the synthesis: cyclone remnants approaching, barometer falling rapidly, exposed positions vulnerable to inundation. Vulnerable positions, the open flanks at Pointe du Hoc, where rangers would hang from ropes in her charted gales. Exhaustion clawed at her as the quay fell silent, the set cooling with a sigh. Duval knocked softly, offering a mug of acorn broth steaming in the chill, its nutty warmth a brief solace. "The Gestapo's vans circled closer," he murmured, his breath fogging the air. "Heard they cracked a code in Toulouse. Weather girl like you." Elise sipped, the liquid burning down to her resolve. She was no longer charting storms, she was summoning them. Her reports the invisible hand, guiding Higgins' boats through mined shallows, turning Normandy's caprice into calculated fury. Lying on the straw pallet that night, the garret's beams groaning under wind gusts, Elise traced the ceiling cracks like invasion routes, risks layered like cumulonimbus, informants, sweeps, the cipher's fragility. Yet in the dark, she pictured the war rooms in England, analysts pinning her data to walls, tides aligning with troop schedules. Her weather was the prelude, the maps beneath the forecasts drawing bloodlines across the sand. Sleep evaded her, replaced by the phantom click of keys, each one a promise of breakers crashing on freedom's shore. February 1941. The garret in Vieux-Lyon perched like a raven's nest above the printer's shop, its slanted roof sagging under a fresh mantle of snow that muffled the city's pulse to a distant hum. Elise Laurent awoke to the metallic tang of frost on her tongue, the straw pallet beneath her crackling as she shifted, her body stiff from the night's vigil. Dawn's grey light seeped through the warped panes, illuminating motes of dust swirling in the chill air, heavy with the residue of ink and developer chemicals from the basement below. At 29, her hands bore the calluses of endless keying, fingers nimble but scarred from paper cuts and the occasional burn from overheating tubes. She rose, pulling on a threadbare sweater that smelled of lye soap and desperation, and peered out at the Saône, its surface a sluggish ribbon of ice-fringed slate under the overcast sky. Downstairs, Duval was already at work, the press thumping rhythmically like a heartbeat, spewing leaflets disguised as agricultural bulletins, recipes for crop rotation laced with calls to sabotage. He nodded as she descended the creaking stairs, his ink-blackened hands offering a crust of rye bread wrapped in newsprint. "Eat quick, mademoiselle. Word from the network. A big push on the wall. Engineers from the organization TOT flooding in from Belgium. Your maps are gold. They need more on the river mouths." His voice was a gravel whisper, eyes flicking to the street where a milk cart rattled past, its horse's breath steaming in the cold. Elise chewed mechanically, the bread's sour grit sticking in her throat, then slipped into her coat. The day's cover demanded she visit the weather station, but first, reconnaissance. She navigated the labyrinthine alleys of Vieux-Lyon, boots crunching on packed snow that glittered like crushed glass underfoot, the air sharp with the scent of baking chestnuts from a corner vendor defying rations. The old quarter's medieval stones loomed, their shadows long and accusatory, hiding doorways where beggars huddled, their eyes hollow but watchful, potential informants or saviors. She paused at a bridge overlook, pretending to consult a pocket almanac, but really scanning the far bank where German supply barges nosed against the docks, their hulls groaning as cranes swung crates of cement and steel girders. Officers in greatcoats paced the quays, their voices barking orders that echoed off the water, Posen accents cutting through the wind. By noon, the station enveloped her in its familiar clamour. The whir of fans circulating stale heat, the ping of teletype bells announcing incoming data from remote sensors along the Atlantic facade. Monsieur Lefebvre hovered near the map wall, his fingers tracing contour lines with a protractor, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. Laurent, The Boches are insatiable. Forecasts for the Seine estuary, currents, siltation rates. They're dredging channels for U-boat pens at La Palisse, but rumors say it's for bigger fish. He leaned in, breath hot and laced with garlic from lunch, his Vichy pin glinting under the fluorescence. Nearby, Captain Miller lounged against a filing cabinet, polishing his Luger with a chamois cloth that whispered softly, his scar twitching as he eyed her approach. Elise settled at her desk, the wooden surface scarred from years of frantic scribbling, and unrolled a roll of nautical charts smuggled in Duval's latest print run. The lamp's bulb hummed overhead, casting a warm halo that belied the cold knot in her gut. She plotted the official data first. Easterly winds persisting, 12 knots, with fog banks forming in the estuary narrows. But beneath, in the evolving cipher, now a matrix of tidal coefficients keyed to wind directions, she etched the real map. Siltation rates doubled as coordinates for Belgian labourers' camps near the Orne River mouth, where watchtowers rose on skeletal scaffolds, guards patrolling with schmeissers slung low. She'd overheard the details from a dockworker in a riverside tavern the night before, the place reeking of spilled absinthe and wet wool, his whisper slurred over a game of belote. "They're chaining us to poor foundations, but the tides there shift like the devil, swallow whole barges if the moon's wrong." Her pencil danced, lines curving into vectors, fog as cover for infiltration, narrows as choke points for floating mines that could be neutralized under her predicted calms. You sense the rhythm in her strokes, the way the room's murmurs fade as focus sharpens, each mark a defiance against Muller's gaze, boring into her back like a bayonet. He sauntered over, boots thudding on the linoleum, and tapped the chart. "Fräulein Laurent, precision is paramount. One erroneous swell reading, and our pens become graves." His English was clipped, eyes narrowing behind wire frames, the Luger's barrel catching the light like a threat. She met his stare evenly, voice calm as a barometer's needle. "Captain, the estuary's notorious. I've factored the lunar cycles. High water at 0200 tomorrow will expose the mudflats for inspection." To him, routine advice. To London, a timestamp for saboteurs to strike the dredgers under darkness, mudflats as escape routes post-blast. Müller grunted approval, retreating with a swirl of cigarette smoke that stung her eyes, leaving her to encode the burst. Lunar influence strong, exposure windows brief but navigable. Afternoon waned into a slate-grey twilight as she left the station, the wind now howling through the streets like a banshee, whipping snow into stinging veils that blurred the gas lamps flickering to life. Back at the garret, the transmitter awaited, its dials cold to the touch. She fired it up as dusk deepened, the tubes glowing like embers in a forge, the room filling with the ozone bite and the faint crackle of interference. Tempate's voice broke through first, gravelly over the static. "Laurent, confirm. SOE confirms your estuary data shifted a convoy route, U-boats rerouted south. Now, the Crown, Mulberry sites, need tidal harmonics for artificial harbours off Arromanches, Deception holding at Calais, feed more there." Elise's fingers flew, the key clicking like castanets in the confined space. "Harmonics stable, NIAP cycle, favouring assembly at 1800 low. Deception fronts building over Pas de Calais, pressure holding high." It was poetry in peril, NIAP cycles as assembly windows for the floating piers, their caissons needing her calm seas to avoid capsizing. Pas de Calais bloated with phantom threats, drawing Rommel's divisions like moths to a false flame. She integrated Duval's latest drop, blueprints of Czech hedgehogs welded in Rouen factories, their spiky forms sketched in hasty pencil on onion skin. Obstacles clustering in shallows, displacement risk under 20-knot southerlies. Displacement, the gales she could summon in code to scatter the barriers, opening lanes for Shermans to rumble ashore. Midnight brought the risk's peak. As the message pulsed out, a low rumble grew outside. Engines, not thunder, direction finders. She cut the power, plunging into blackness, heart slamming like a depth charge. Peering from the gable, she saw vans with swastika flags idling in the square below, spotlights sweeping the facades, their beams slicing the night like scalpels. Shouts in German echoed up the alley, doors crashing open in nearby buildings. Duval's press silenced abruptly, a muffled curse filtering through the floor. Elise crouched by the table, maps clutched to her chest, the paper crinkling like dry leaves, breath shallow and ragged. Minutes stretched into eternity, the cold seeping through cracks, carrying the acrid whiff of burning rubbish from a Gestapo brazier. The vans moved on at last, tires' chains clattering over cobblestones, leaving the quarter in shuddering quiet. She reignited the set with trembling hands, sending a final, urgent fragment: sweep averted, harbour sink confirmed, waves under 1 meter for deployment. Tempête acknowledged with a burst. Gold, Laurent, you're the tide turner. As the tubes cooled, their heat fading like spent resolve, Elise folded the charts into her hidden cache, a false-bottom drawer in Duval's desk, lined with oiled cloth against damp. The garret settled, wind moaning through eaves like a lament, but in her veins surged the fire of purpose. Dawn would bring more foraging, markets for scraps of talk, stations for veils of data. But tonight, in the ink-scented hush, she traced the invasion's skeleton on mental parchment, estuaries as arteries, tides as the pulse driving Allied steel to Normandy's heart. The wall loomed, but her maps were the cracks widening. Weather the wedge, splitting it asunder. Sleep claimed her fitfully on the pallet, dreams of churning seas and coded gales, the shore calling like a siren's promise. The broadcasts would endure, each one carving deeper into the fortress, until the real storm broke. March 1944. The garret in Vieux-Lyon had become a fortress of frayed nerves and flickering shadows, its walls scarred by 3 more years of evasion. Raids dodged, handlers lost, codes reinvented like skins shed in the night. Elise Laurent, now 32, moved with the ghost-like grace of survival, her once vibrant frame leaner, etched by rations and relentless broadcasts, dark hair streaked with premature silver pinned back under a woolen beret. The air up here hung heavy with the perpetual bite of damp plaster and the sharp electric tang of the upgraded wireless set. A captured German model, its dials etched in Gothic script, humming on a makeshift shelf reinforced with salvaged crates. Outside, spring teased the zone with reluctant warmth, buds swelling on the riverside willows, but the city below pulsed with occupation's iron grip. Checkpoints bristling with machine gun nests, the distant thunder of V-1 buzz bombs testing their wings over the channel. Duval was long gone, executed in a dawn sweep the previous autumn after a betrayed drop, his press now silent. The garret her solitary redoubt, supplied by a chain of couriers too faceless to name. Tempête had risen in the network, his gravelly directives arriving via microdot inked on cigarette papers, urging her deeper into the web. The Atlantic wall was no longer a sketch, but a behemoth. Miles of concrete dragon's teeth, minefields sown like deadly seeds along the tide lines from Brittany to Flanders. Yet her maps, evolved from scribbles to layered masterpieces, tides as timelines, swells as siege engines, had pierced its hide, feeding SOE planners the veins to sever. This morning, as mist rolled off the river like a German smokescreen, Elise descended to the weather station one last time, her satchel bulging with forged credentials and a final sheaf of charts. The building's lobby reeked of stale sweat and machine oil, clerks shuffling like automatons under the watchful eyes of SS overseers, their black uniforms cutting through the crowd like knives. Lefebvre was a shell now, his Vichy pin tarnished, face gaunt from a stomach ulcer gnawing at his collaboration's cost. He intercepted her in the corridor, voice a hoarse rasp amid the clatter of typewriters. Laurent, it's the endgame. The Boche demand full coastal synoptics, every beach from Utah to Juneau down to the grain of sand. They're frantic, Rommel's inspecting personally. Though his eyes, bloodshot and pleading, darted to the map room where Müller, no, his successor, a bull-necked major named Klein, with a dueling scar and a perpetual scowl, pored over intercepts, his fist pounding the table like a gavel. Elise nodded, throat dry as chalk, and claimed her alcove. The desk lamp buzzed to life, illuminating the official atlas. Pressure systems coiling over the Biscay like serpents ready to strike. But she saw the truth beneath. Her cumulative work, years of coded gales distilled into invasion blueprints. RAF strikes had tested her data. Last week's raid on Calais drew flak that shredded the sky, but her fog advisories had veiled the true probes along Normandy, drawing reserves to the decoy. Now, with the moon waxing toward full, the window narrowed. She traced the final overlays. Variable winds, 5 to 10 knots from southwest, seas calming to 0.5 meters off Arromanches by H-hour. The assault's 0 point, whispered in Tempe's last missive, set for the 6th under cover of her predicted overcast. Klein's boots echoed as he approached, the air thickening with his cologne, a cloying mix of leather and arrogance. Fräulein, the Führer expects perfection. One false breeze, and the invasion phantoms become our reality. He leaned in, breath hot on her neck, the scar on his jaw twitching like a live wire. Elise's pulse thrummed, but her voice stayed level, fingers steady on the protractor. Major, the barometer holds steady at 10:15. Low swells favor clear approaches at the Calvados, ideal for patrols. To him, reassurance for U-boat sweeps. To London, the green light. Mulberry Harbour's deployable in her tranquil bays, landing craft threading mine channels she'd charted through silt shifts and lunar pools. Afternoon bled into urgency as she slipped away, the streets alive with the rumble of troop transports, panzers clanking toward the coast, their diesel exhaust choking the air like despair. Back in the garret, the wireless warmed under her hands, tubes glowing fierce in the gathering dusk, the room's chill chased by the set's heat. You feel it now, the weight in her chest, the way the key bites into her palm like a promise. Each click a detonation waiting across the water. Tempe's signal crackled first. Laurent, final sync, D-Day confirmed. Your maps are the spine. Omaha cliffs scalable at 0630 under your mist. Utah sands firming post low. Feed the storm if it turns. Her response pulsed out, a symphony of deception and truth. Overcast persisting, sealing 800 feet, scattered showers masking approaches to Sword, neap tides exposing viable exits at 0700. It was the culmination. Point du Hoc's precarious guns, vulnerable to her erosion forecasts, rangers to rope the sheer faces in her veiled squalls, Gold's bluffs riddled with unfinished revetments, her swell data timing the naval barrage to shatter them. Years of whispers, from dockside mutters to bureau intercepts, woven into this, hedgehogs displaceable by her gale warnings, river mouths as inland routes for Shermans, estuaries drained for glider fields. The signal arced over the channel, static whispering like surf, landing in Bletchley basements, where analysts pinned her words to walls. Eisenhower's planners nodding in the lamplight of Southwick House. Interference spiked mid-transmission. A whine like tearing metal. Direction finders closing in. Elise killed the power, the room plunging to twilight hush, heart echoing the river's lap below. From the gable she watched, a grey opal idling at the bridge, antennas twitching like antennae, spotlights probing the alleys. Shouts rose, doors splintering in the distance. Another sweep. Gestapo hounds on the scent. She dismantled the set in fevered haste. Components scattering into a floorboard cache lined with tarpaulin, maps rolled tight and swallowed in her coat's lining. The opal crept closer, engine purring menace. Klein's voice barking orders from its window, his scar a pale slash in the gloom. Footsteps clattered up the stairs, boots, not Duval's ghost. Elise froze, breath bated, then bolted for the rear dormer, a rope ladder uncoiling into the void like a lifeline. She swung out into the night, the Sohn's chill breath slapping her face, hands raw on the hemp as she descended the sheer drop, city lights blurring through tears of strain. The garret door crashed open above, Klein's roar mingling with the crash of overturned furniture. She hit the key running, shadows swallowing her form amid crates and refuse. The river's murk her ally as she waded to a waiting skiff, Tempate's final gift. Oars muffled in felt. Paddling into the current, the invasion's eve unfurled in her mind. Her weather the cloak, maps the blade. Far off, the first Allied fleets massed, hulls cutting waves she'd tamed in code. By dawn, as she vanished into the Resistance's veins, smuggled south toward the Pyrenees, a new identity as a Basque shepherdess, the storm she'd summoned broke. Radios in London crackled her legacy. Go. Beaches ignited, her tides turning sand to salvation, gales scattering Luftwaffe eyes. Elise, adrift on black waters, felt the shift, the wall cracking under the weight of her veiled forecasts, Normandy's shores awash in the fury she'd charted, one coded cloud at a time. The war's tide had turned, and she was its unseen architect, free at last in the wake of the breakers.